When did you start writing?
I started writing, I think I was in, let's see, it would have been, there was this snowstorm that happened in 1993, which was this giant snowstorm that happened throughout the East Coast, I believe. But anyway, West Virginia got pounded. And I remember wanting a book from again, the Rainelle Public Library, because I decided in my brain that I was going to be a poet. And I took my mom after about the third or fourth day, there was enough snow that had melted that we could go to the library, and I got Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, which at the time I had no connection to whatsoever. I think I knew "Oh Captain, My Captain" probably from that movie with Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. That's probably how I knew Walt Whitman. And I can remember getting the book and I was like, what is this thing? And I think the book also had the different versions, because there's like the 1855 version, then there's like the 1872 version. And so it was like, oh, okay, this is the same poem, but slightly different, that was in a book that he published, 10 to 15 years before. So yeah, I mean, I just loved finding things. And then once you found those things, you found out about other things through those things, and I've continued that sort of behavior. I mean, I'm going to be 45 years old, and
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. And I still do the same thing. Like, I read about something, and then something is included within that I start reading. Or now I look at a lot of Wikipedia type stuff, and if something's in the Wikipedia article, then I'll click on that and get books in that way.
I definitely miss, like, back in the day, it was before the ease of looking things up. Like when I was writing about a place like West Virginia, it was not. Now you can find everything on there. But for me, it was talking to people, looking at maps, reading books. I would call and talk to people from the area, and I treasured that. I miss that. I think there's so much that is just in the echo chamber, because I just noticed when I'm very suspicious when I'm looking up someone, because I know what's happened with me, because people, when something enters a dominant culture, it becomes this accepted truth, and people aren't considering, well, what is an original source? And there's so much that gets lost of what might be what you would find if you really did a deep dive. And I think what gets lost is even the knowledge of how to do that kind of original, more difficult research.
But what was wonderful about, I think, those pre-internet days is the way that you could kind of use your imagination to kind of even imagine the type of things that were out there. And maybe it's similar too with what you did with, your books in relationship to West Virginia's. There was something when I read those when I was in graduate school, I think. So I just graduated college and discovered those books. And it was a West Virginia that that felt real to me, because it sort of felt psychedelic, or it felt like, in that West Virginia has this long tradition of, I don't know, social realist sort of realism, capital R kind of novels, where some lady will write about the history of West Virginia, and one novel is about the 18th century, and one novel is about, the 1910s, 1920s. But there was something in that, in just imagining it, that felt more connected to me and what I experienced about the place than necessarily some of the kind of literary examples I was shown. I guess it's like Stephen Crane never fought in a war, and he wrote The Red Badge of Courage. Like, the human brain can do amazing things, and to kind of discount the imagination and in that way is definitely a negative in my book, because I think Red Badge of Courage is a pretty good book.
First of all, thank you for saying that. I love how in your work you're inviting people, why it was so important to me is there are times when we're sitting with Scott and we know Scott knows better and he's being awful. And even Sarah's being awful. Like you have these characters where we're invited to care about them. I mean, we're not invited, we care about them. And you teach, and do you ever run into issues where people get confused about things that the Scott of your fiction does? Because the books are, I mean, they're published as fiction, right?
Yeah, I think Crapalagia's
Oh,
published.
non.
I think that's published as nonfiction, but for the most part, they're novels. Even Crapalagia's a novel. I think they made me put that subtitle on there just because books weren't getting published like that at the time.
I don't give a fuck about like to
Fiction.
me, the whole thing is like, here I publish my shit as fiction and I get hung out like you wrote memoir. To me, it's like it's all fucking fiction. It's
Yeah,
all
of course. Yeah, for sure. Are you asking me about my job and like people thinking that I'm an awful person because I'm writing about awful behavior sometimes?
No, not thinking you're an awful person, but reading. No, because
I think I understand. Yeah, I think I understand your question. I don't know if my students like care, to be quite honest with you. Like most of my students, they're going to be nurses or teachers or something along those lines. I know I have students from time to time who know that I'm a writer and who read my work. And it is always a bit uncomfortable in that way. But I've typically found it to be like I remember there was someone a couple years ago who came to my office and wanted me to sign their books. And this was a real quiet student who I had.
Mhm.
And I'd never really even spoken to this student outside of class. And I can remember being like feeling a little uncomfortable and a little like standoffish about it. But there's always this thing that I think writers do, where maybe the intelligent ones, at least the intelligent ones, are always a little bit paranoid. In that, we think that they're thinking something about a text when that may not even be the case. That student may just she really loved the books and she wanted me to, sign the books in that way. And she wasn't thinking, anything. So yeah, I mean, it is something that I always like kind of worry about. And it is something that I always, kind of have, but that's sort of the way that when I meet people now, or they become kind of friends with people, my writing life is always eventually part of the conversation, which is always kind of strange to me. I compartmentalize, I think, things in my writing life, which is my life, that's my soul. I compartmentalize that in a separate way from my interpersonal relationships as much as I can.
I think that's what I think a lot of writers I connect to were very, very good at that, especially writers who've gone through trauma. And I don't want to overuse, I feel that word's been co-opted, but so let's break it down a little bit, because I'm not sure in which book, but it's clear to me, and I love the stated way of capturing the experience of a child, a young person experiencing what we would call sexual abuse, molestation, inappropriate, and repeated abuse, and witnessing it with going on around. And we know that causes trauma. And it's stated in this way that I know is true, that I don't think most people really have gotten the prevalence of, and how it's just the state of how things are, that there isn't this kind of like, it's kind of become this myth of like, he came into my bedroom and he did this, and then and then the world, and I became a psycho killer, and this, like it's an
Yeah, of
emotional
course.
type of thing where if I think the prevalence of it and the invisibility and the silence around I can't say it.
Yeah.
Just can't say it. Can you say it? Can you stunt double?
Ubiquitous, is that what you're gonna say?
Thank you, God. Amen. So the all overness of it, of sexual abuse, the commonness, and the effects of it, it's almost like you drive, and if you're driving in you live in a rural area and you hit an animal, and it's like, well, you hit an animal and you put it to the side of the road and you keep going. It's there in your work, in that honest experience that's heartbreaking and wrenching. And I found myself, I was at once very moved and angry, and not angry at.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and I guess maybe I can answer it. I've always been interested in narratives of, no, I don't think any individual thinks of themselves as a villain, and I don't know if truthfully, any individual thinks of themselves as a saint either. But for some reason in our stories, oftentimes, we editorialize in a way that we kind of connect to characters those particular traits. And in Hill William, specifically, I just wanted to present, this experience of, the world of childhood, right? That is probably, like you say, probably much more common than we even know about. And so maybe goes back to my answer about that kind of time travel effect of like fiction, not only time travel, but kind of inhabiting someone else even through the little markings that they place on a particular page. Where, yeah, for at least a moment, even though we're all trapped and bound by our flesh and our blood and our bones, there is a kind of freedom in story and being able to kind of experience the world through another's eyes, on an empathetic level of just reading. It's sort of strange, that kind of, again, spell that I think really good writing can get across to a reader.